My name is Corey Ransom. I'm the Extension Weed Specialist here at Utah State University, and I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you a little bit about weed control in alfalfa this evening. We're going to talk about chemical options and some of the things that we've seen through research, but I just want to point out it's really critical that you integrate your management of weeds in your alfalfa crop, and this includes, starting with weed-free seed. I'll show you an example of what you don't want to happen. And then good cultural controls, all the way from variety selection, fertility, irrigation, to stand replacement. There comes a time when the stand is too thin and it's going to be difficult to control weeds in that stand. And then when we think about chemical control, we have options for controlling weeds during stand establishment, in-season options from year to year, and then dormant applications that typically take place in the late fall or the early spring while the alfalfa is dormant and not actively growing. And I'm going to focus on dormant applications this evening. This is a picture of a field. I got a call from a grower and he said, I have this orange twiny stuff in my alfalfa field. I've never seen it before. And this is daughter, and evidently he bought some seed that had a daughter seed in it as a contaminant. And so this is a mess the year he planted it, and it'll be a mess for the next 20 years as he tries to deal with that weed. And so the story here is don't buy cheap seed if you're not sure that it's weed free. And then I see a lot of fields that look like this, and so that's why I'm kind of focused on dormant herbicide applications. Those winter annuals like the mustards and the annual grasses become problematic, and the time to control those is while the crop is dormant. So I'm hoping to cover these things. We'll talk about label changes and new uses, paraquat and Roundup, dormant herbicide treatments, the impact of timing and combinations on really alfalfa injury, and then I want to introduce a new species that we're concerned about for control in alfalfa. So during the summer, our summer field tour, our virtual field tour, Earl Creech talked about some of the changes to the paraquat label, resulting from some changes that took place in about 2016. Paraquat is currently under review by the EPA, and the proposed changes that have just been posted include that it will eliminate any aerial applications. It eliminates applications with the use of a backpack or spray gun. It will limit the application rate to 1 pound of acid equivalent per acre or active ingredient per acre in alfalfa, which isn't a problem because our rates are generally within that. If a person is treating more than 80 acres in a 24-hour period, it will require a closed cab. And if it's less than 80 acres, it will still require either a closed cab or a PF10 respirator. The re-entry interval before somebody can go back into the field will be 48 hours. It will include mandatory spray drift language. And it does ease up on one restriction. It does allow truck drivers who are not certified applicators to transport previously open containers. But as Earl had pointed out this summer, that due to this, many people may be looking to change from using paraquat because of the extreme restrictions. And these restrictions come because it is a very acutely toxic product. And I'll come back to some of the other options. The other label that many people may not be aware of is that Roundup on its label allows the use of Roundup in non-Roundup ready alfalfa. And so if you read the PowerMax label, it allows 6 to 8 ounces to be applied to alfalfa in the spring before the first trifoliate leaf expansion. So this is when the alfalfa is truly dormant. It says do not include ammonium sulfate because you're trying to minimize the injury to the alfalfa. Only 1 application per year. Do not graze or harvest for a minimum of 36 hours, which isn't difficult if you have little alfalfa just beginning to grow. And they do state that some injury and some yield loss should be expected. So the question is, why would you consider using this? Well, you might get be able to get winter annual grass control without using gramoxone. So this is one potential solution to using gramoxone. But I would just restate here, do not use this particular application without consulting the label. And you want to be really careful because different formulations of Roundup have different concentrations. And you'll see in my slides in a minute that concentration is really critical to the selectivity of this treatment. Okay, let's talk about some of the dormant herbicide treatments that are available. First, I just wanted to talk about those that are typically applied to the foliage. And so this includes paraquat or gramoxone, again, a restricted use pesticide. It's it's labeled for application late winter or early spring when alfalfa is dormant. And you can see there, because of its toxicity, it has one of the longest pre-harvest intervals of 70 days, but again, is not usually a problem since it's applied when the alfalfa is not really actively growing. AIM and Sharpen are two contact herbicides that are labeled for use in alfalfa, and AIM can be applied to dormant alfalfa or between cuttings, and Sharpen can be applied to dormant alfalfa that's less than 4 inches tall. And then again, we talked about Roundup. And then two others I included here, which have a pretty good foliar activity, would be Pursuit and Raptor. And these applications typically to mature alfalfa are made when the alfalfa is less than 3 inches tall. And Pursuit allows between cutting applications, and actually Raptor allows applications anytime there's less than 3 inches of growth. So this could be early spring or between cuttings as well. When we look at the residual herbicides that are available for use in alfalfa, it's a long list. Chateau, Prowl H2O, Treflan, Velpar, Carmex, and Velpar Alphamax, which is a combination of those. Metribuzin as Tricor or Dimetric, Sinbar, two restricted use products, Curb and Warrant. And then I've included also, because Pursuit has some residual activity, that you might see some control out of that. But when we look at all of these, again, they differ in the stage of growth where application is made. You'll see that these in the blue box, all of those have the same mode of action, and all of those must be applied to alfalfa that's less than 2 inches tall. And again, we'll focus on what happens if the application is made late. I do want to also point out that many of these herbicides have restrictions based on soil texture and type, as well as plant back restrictions. So be really careful when you're making those choices that you're not planning to rotate out of that alfalfa the next year, or make sure you pick a product that will allow you to rotate to a small grain or whatever else is in your rotation. Okay, so now I would just want to show some results of some work looking at timings and combinations. And first we'll talk about some work with Paraquat, AIM, and Sharpen, really seeing how AIM and Sharpen compare to Paraquat as far as alfalfa injury. And then trial where I looked at Roundup versus Sharpen. And so one trial we conducted was in the spring of 2018, and we really wanted to look at this because when you drive around the valley, you see fields that look like this. Obviously, if you get a little late with the timing of your Velpar, you can really yellow a field up. And so our treatments included gramoxone, AIM, and Sharpen as Burndown products, and then Raptor, Pursuit, Velpar, Tricor, Prowl H2O, Direx, Curb, and Sinbar, kind of a sampling of all of those. And then we had combinations of gramoxone and Sharpen with both Prowl H2 and Velpar. And our treatments were applied when the alfalfa was 1.5 inches. And so what we saw in that trial was that AIM and Sharpen definitely have higher levels of injury in gramoxone. So this slide shows gramoxone treated alfalfa a few weeks after treatment. And this one shows the AIM treated alfalfa. So you can see it desiccates much larger percentage of the plant. And then here you can see the Sharpen. So again, very active. In this trial, none of the other herbicides caused more than 10% injury. And it's interesting to note that Velpar or Prowl added to gramoxone or Sharpen did not increase injury. So we're not seeing synergy when we put one of these soil active herbicides with a post-emergent product, which is good. This slide just shows, again, another comparison a little bit later of the untreated, gramoxone to the right, AIM in the lower left-hand corner, and then Sharpen. And you can see that the Sharpen plots are taking a long time to come back. So in 2020, Earl Creech put this research plot out, and this was more focused on comparing Paraquat, AIM, and Sharpen all alone or combined with Velpar Alpha Max, as well as Velpar Alpha Max on its own. And these are applied to 2 inches of regrowth of alfalfa. And you can see that some of these products cause quite a bit of response. And then they measured injury, height, and first cutting yield. And if you want to see kind of a review of this, you can go to our USU Extension Crops website, and you can replay Earl Creech's comments on our summer field tour. So this chart just shows evaluation dates and the average alfalfa height in centimeters. And this is really complex, so I'm going to break this down for you just a little bit. Let me pull out just some treatments. So this chart shows the height of plots treated with gramoxone, gramoxone plus Velpar, Sharpen, and Sharpen plus Velpar. And I just want to point out that if you added Velpar to either gramoxone or Sharpen or AIM, you did not see any different injury than with the gramoxone, Sharpen, or AIM alone. And so now I just want to show you a chart that shows gramoxone, AIM, and Sharpen alone, and Velpar Alpha Max alone. And what we observed is that gramoxone and Velpar Alpha Max, while they do stunt the alfalfa, it rebounds rather quickly, and the growth is similar, except for the little bit of stunting at the very beginning to the untreated. Whereas the AIM and Sharpen, you can see the 2 lines below, they didn't begin growing for quite a bit of time, and then they really had to work hard to try and catch up. So you see they never really got back to the level of the untreated. And what's interesting, if you look at the relative growth rate, so we're looking at centimeters of height per centimeter of growth per day. So it's based on how big it was the previous time you evaluated it and how many centimeters it produced since that point in time. What we really see is that where the plots we treated with AIM and Sharpen in the diamonds, so let me see if I can draw those there. I'm not gonna, here we go. So right here, oh. Anyway, if we look at those two, what we really see is that the peak growth was delayed by about 3 weeks compared to gramoxone or Velpar Alpha Max. And so in the end, all of the treatments had a little slightly lower yield compared to the untreated, but the gramoxone and the Velpar and the combination were much closer in yield than the AIM or the Sharpen. And so again, that extreme delay in beginning growth at the beginning of the season, or that setback, ends up costing yield. And so I want to talk about then another comparison that I wanted to do, and this is trying to address that low use rate of Roundup in non-Roundup ready alfalfa and how important timing and rate is. And so here we treated the alfalfa with 6, 8, 10, or 12 ounces per acre of Roundup Power Max, and we compared that to 2 ounces of Sharpen. And we really want to see the difference between a contact herbicide and a herbicide like Roundup, which is systemic. And then each of these treatments were applied at 3 different timings: March 23rd to 1-inch alfalfa, May 3rd to 2-inch alfalfa, and April 14th to 3.5-inch alfalfa. And just for your reminder, the Roundup Power Max label says that you can only apply between 6 and 8 ounces to non-Roundup ready alfalfa. So this 10 and 12 ounces are above what would be allowed by the label. And so this chart shows a visual injury. So 0 injury means no injury, and 100% injury means that the entire plant's been desiccated. And then we can see that the red, green, and yellow and blue shapes are the Roundup treatments at the different rates. And then the Sharpen, the contact herbicide, is represented by this purple square. And what we saw is that when you applied these in March, the March 23rd application, then several weeks later, a lot of injury to the alfalfa, but keep in mind it's very small. And then you can see that all of the treatments, the injury decreases, and amazingly, the 6-ounce rate of Roundup on the second evaluation had the least injury. But then we see that the injury from Sharpen drops down here to a low. And then at the end, the 6 and 8-ounce rates of Roundup and the Sharpen have the least injury, and you can see that those higher rates of Roundup have slightly more injury. If that application was delayed until April 4th, so between this timing and the next evaluation, now what we see is that the Burndown herbicide, immediately causes a lot of injury, but then immediately that plant starts to recover, much quicker the plant recovers. Then you can see it kind of flatlining here at about 15 or 20% injury. Whereas where we applied the alfalfa treatments that late, the 2 higher rates really continue to stunt the alfalfa as the untreated grows. So the injury really doesn't decline over time because the stunting is not going away. And then again, if you delay it until 3.5-inch alfalfa, we again see extreme burn down from the Sharpen, but then by the last evaluation date, that's come down to about 30% injury, where all of the Roundup treatments you can see are increasing in injury as we go through time. They're not coming back out of that injury. When you look at the yields, I was kind of surprised. Only the Roundup applied at 6, 8, or 10 ounces on the first application date produced yields similar to the untreated. All of the other treatments significantly reduced yield. And you can see the impact of delaying the application on the alfalfa yield. The later you wait to apply those, the less time the alfalfa has to recover and the lower the yield. And I was pretty shocked that the Sharpen actually even applied at the earliest date didn't recover. And so we might want to think about, if you're going to use Sharpen, applying it as early as possible. So I think the lesson learned from this is that application timing is critical in minimizing herbicide injury to alfalfa. The use of these dormant treatments can really improve winter annual weed control and provide additional herbicide modes of action for managing herbicide resistance. And again, always read the label. The last thing I want to just talk about for a second is a new species, cutleaf vipergrass, that we're concerned about in alfalfa. It looks a little bit like salsify, but it has a smaller seed head. It's this simple perennial with a taproot. Here's a salsify head on the left and a cutleaf vipergrass head on the right. And we did some trials in alfalfa, and in the red bar, this represents % control of all of these treatments applied early spring. And what you'll see is that none of the herbicides, Raptor, Pursuit, Butirac, Gramoxone, AIM, Sharpen, Gramoxone plus Velpar, only Raptor plus Butirac gave some level of control or injury to cutleaf vipergrass, but none of the other treatments were effective at all. Whereas with downy brome, Raptor, Gramoxone, and Velpar, or Raptor and Butirac did a really good job. This is how thick it can become in a really poor alfalfa stand. This is what the biomass looks like. And so the take-home message here is, if you see vipergrass, try and control it before it shows up in your alfalfa fields. And you're going to want to know this for the end of the workshop tonight, but cutleaf vipergrass is not easy to control in alfalfa. And so if you get asked that, you should know that that's true, that it's not. So there's time. I maybe have time for a quick question.
It looks like we have a little bit of time, and that question's in the chat. I'll go ahead and read it for you. This question says, Old timers used to use a harrow or Danish digger to work alfalfa early to reduce grasses / pepperweed. Any comparisons of tillage type efforts in comparison to chemical use?
We have not done that. I know one of the reasons that people have gone away from that is that you typically get a lot of injury to the crowns of the alfalfa, and that opens them up for disease. And so as far as stand life goes, that's pretty hard on it, but no, I don't have any good comparisons there. I will mention that Treflan, one of the herbicides that can be used on dormant alfalfa, does require incorporation. And so again, in the past, people would actually cultivate in order to incorporate the Treflan so that it would be active. Oh, I see another one down there about dodder. Can I jump to that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
The herbicides Treflan and Prowl H2O, as well as Curb, all have some level of dodder control. Based on kind of the properties of the herbicide, I would recommend Prowl H2O. I think it's probably the best option. Another question was, did we try Roundup on vipergrass? Yes, I did that work in conjunction with Jody Gale and Mark Nelson down in Sulphurdale. And Jody Gale sprayed different rates on just some vipergrass, and it looks like at 44 ounces per acre, that high rate, that maybe you'll get some good suppression. So Roundup Ready alfalfa, which would allow you to spray that rate, may be an option for managing cutleaf vipergrass.